Sporting 4, Manchester City 1. Not a bad send-off at all for Ruben Amorim in his last home game in charge of the club. But how did they get the job done? How were they so effective, and how did they punish Manchester City so brutally? Well, today I'm going to tell you, but only if you subscribe to the channel first. Have you done it? Okay, let's take a look. So for the purpose of today's video, we are going to be focusing on Sporting out of possession, because ultimately they only had 27% possession in this game. So most of the work they looked to do was defensively. They were looking to close gaps off the ball, apply pressure where they could, at times be pinned back, and ultimately provide a transitioning threat. Let's look at how they've done that, because in the first half it was very different to the second half. In the first half, Sporting started the game by trying to get pressure on the ball where they could. We would see Gyökeres, the striker, dropping deep onto the Manchester City pivot, and then we would see the two wingers coming inside onto the two centre-backs. Now the idea when you do this is that your two wing-backs then play these sort of in-between roles, where they are half marking a winger, half ready to go get the fullback. And the idea is, should the goalkeeper clip the ball over like this, you then go and engage and you can be aggressive. This is what Sporting were trying to do, but they were not executing this particularly well at all in the first half of the match. Particularly down the left-hand side, Ederson had the pass on to Rico Lewis all day long because Araujo was too deep. This allowed Manchester City to play through the first phase, move the ball forward pretty easily. Not a great start from Sporting. Now, of course, we all know that when you apply pressure in a fairly passive manner and the opposition are able to play out from the back with ease, you soon have to drop off, and Sporting looked to do exactly that. This very much became a 5-2-3 as opposed to a 3-4-3. The wing-backs were forced into these deeper positions, and Sporting were forced potentially to play in a passive manner, dropping players behind the ball. Now the interesting thing here is how Manchester City looked to approach the game. You see someone like Rico Lewis initially appears to be a right back, but that soon changed. He would invert into midfield. Phil Foden would move into the 10 position, and Gvardiol, who's a left back, actually tucked into more of a back three. Now Manchester City have this back three here, then sort of a diamond shape in the midfield, and then the front three. This straight away caused problems for Sporting, because Sporting were unable to get pressure on the ball. The reason for that is because they were outnumbered in most areas, because they were worried about the threat of Manchester City, I think. For example, in these deeper positions here, let's say Manchester City are building with a deep three, let's say Kovacic is going to help out, but also on this occasion Rico Lewis is going to drop deeper as well. That's 5 Manchester City players. Sporting were only able to go up against this with 3 players. A 5 versus 3 against incredible technical quality isn't going to go particularly well. You're going to struggle to get pressure on the ball. Now, I understand why Ruben Amorim done this, because if you go man-to-man with this City team for 90 minutes, chances are their superior quality will pick you off. So I understand why Amorim was trying this. The problem was structurally it was a little bit wrong in the first half, and this caused problems. One of the problems was that the 2 deeper central midfielders couldn't join the front players. They couldn't get pressure onto these midfielders, and the reason for that was because the centre-backs were worried about being aggressive on these players here. So ultimately the centre-backs sat off a little bit, like so, but that meant that the midfielders had to sit off a little bit, and that meant that City had a lot of joy in this phase of the pitch. We can see it here. Just 3 Sporting players against the Manchester City 5. You're never going to win that battle. These 3 are in a position, but to be honest, they're relatively ineffective. They're trying to stop passes through the middle of the pitch, but it's a difficult job. The reason their job is difficult is because the 2 behind them can't join, and the reason the 2 behind them can't join the press is because the 3 centre-backs are marking Erling Haaland. They're worried about him, but this gave City so much control early in the game. Now yes, Manchester City may have had control during this spell of the game, but the question is, with that control, were they able to progress the ball and actually cause problems? To be honest, yes they were. They quickly took up this 3 diamond 3 shape. You can see it in the average positions in the first half. This is the shape that they were looking to use. This caused a lot of problems for Sporting, because the front 3 were relatively ineffective. The midfield 2 are trying to do a job on these deeper positions here. Manchester City are essentially 4v2 in these positions. And if we quickly put this diagram on screen here, you can see the areas where City are going to dominate. These spaces outside of the Sporting structure. And we can see clips of it in the match as well. There was so much space in these wide positions, far too much room for Manchester City to move into. And particularly when those players are Bernardo Silva, Kovacic, Phil Foden, Rico Lewis. The technical quality is off the charts. It's absurd. Leaving them 4 versus 2 is a problem. The other problem that Sporting had here was that the centre-backs were worried. They were stuck a little bit in between. Do I want to go and be aggressive towards the ball here, but leave space for Haaland? Or do I want to drop off, help my centre-back partner with Haaland, but now Rico Lewis has time on the ball. This was the real problem for Sporting in the first half. I understand being passive, I understand sitting off in a mid-block, but at some point you have to get pressure on the ball, if not the opposition just keep coming on to you. So the idea was right. It was right to try and be passive, but the execution was poor. Fortunately for Sporting, they still didn't concede too many chances despite the lack of control on the game. And the reason they didn't concede many chances was because ultimately they still had 5 defenders of the back. 3 of those were centre-backs, big, strong physical players, but also 2 central midfielders in front of them as well. So even when City could progress the ball and move into dangerous areas, Sporting were able to largely reduce the chances for the opposition. But Amorim still knew he had to change something. So all video long, I've been hinting at Ruben Amorim making this big change at half-time. What was that change? Well, to be honest, initially it appeared as though he hadn't changed anything. The exact same 11 came out for the start of the second half, but tactically it was very different, because Gonçalves, who was previously a left-sided inside forward, was now playing as a left-sided central midfielder. So rather than being up here, he was deeper in here, giving Sporting this 3-man midfield. Now, what is the benefit of doing this? Previously, we saw that Manchester City had 4 players in this area and Sporting only had 2. Well, if we now move Trincao behind the striker, like Sporting did, you will suddenly see it's 4v4. Trincao is on the pivot, Gonçalves is here, Ruben is here, and Morita is here. Suddenly, Sporting were able to match up in midfield. So rather than being 4 versus 2, it was 4 versus 4. You don't have to be a genius to know that's going to be a bit easier from a defensive point of view. This also massively helped the centre-backs as well, because previously they were unsure whether they should jump or not. Should I go and get Bernardo Silva in this area, or should I drop off a little bit deeper? Suddenly, that extra midfield protection was there. It made the job easier, it allowed more centre-backs to mark Haaland. Overall, Sporting were much more compact, they were much more settled, but importantly, they were able to be more aggressive. They were able to step out and apply pressure to the wide areas. You see, previously we were speaking about City having all the time in the world in these wide areas. Suddenly they don't, because Sporting have matched up in these positions. So now, when the ball does go wide, let's say Gvardiol comes forward with the ball and the wing-back is drawn out, now Sporting are able to be aggressive. They are able to match up on the occasions that they want to. When you do that, you can overturn the ball, and then suddenly you can transition. And we know this season, Manchester City are incredibly weak in the transition. Defensively, they really struggle with situations like this. So we can see Sporting here. We've got that 3 in midfield, then we've got Trincao, really narrow, really inside on Kovacic, and then Gyökeres up front. A 5-3-1-1 shape, or a 5-diamond-1, you could call it that as well. But the important thing about it is the ability to match up out wide 3 versus 3. Rather than being 3 versus 1 like we saw in the first half or 3 versus 2, it's 3 versus 3. This is much easier for the players to deal with. And eventually we can see this aggression, this willingness to be more assertive, more intense, get towards the ball. The player intensity increased at the same time, which certainly helped. And suddenly you can force turnovers in these positions and you can move forward. And we kept seeing situations like this for the first 20 minutes of the second half. Again, the 5-3-1-1 situation like this, the midfield is matched up. This is the important thing. The midfield is matched. Sporting were down 2 men in this phase in the first half. In the second half, they were man for man. That is a big difference. It's a very subtle tweak from Ruben Amorim, moving one inside forward a little bit deeper, the other one narrower, but it completely changes the game. It stops Manchester City not dominating the ball, because they did still have more possession, but it stopped them progressing the ball with such ease. And suddenly Sporting were able to set traps in these wide positions. Previously there was space out here, but now there isn't. Sporting were able to win the ball back and then transition. And I tell you, when this side transitions, they are incredibly dangerous. They're led by Gyökeres, one of the best transitioning forwards on the planet at the moment. His power, his ability to run into channels, and his finishing is absolutely devastating. He is a brutal striker. In this game, we actually didn't even see the best of him, despite the hat-trick. That's how good he is. But also players like Trincao and Gonçalves are incredibly important. They aren't the biggest players in the world, they aren't the quickest players, they aren't the most powerful, but they are excellent, delicate ball carriers, gliding past players in the middle of the pitch, moving away from players like Kovacic, making the attacks incredibly dangerous just by carrying the ball forward. And then of course on top of that, you've got the athleticism, the intensity of the wing-backs, supporting these transitioning situations. This is how Sporting flipped the game on its head. In the first half it was passive because they were outnumbered. In the second half, thanks to the tactical tweak, they were able to match up with City, be aggressive, turn the ball over and transition. So ultimately, it's a pretty good night for Sporting, and of course Ruben Amorim. He recognised his mistake in the first half, and I want to use the term mistake loosely. I wouldn't say they got it horribly wrong. The idea of being passive and giving City time is fine, because City are a phenomenal team. but the structure they used wasn't quite right. Amorim recognised that, he made the change, he acknowledged it, which is very important for a manager to do, but even more importantly, the change he made worked. He affected this game with his tactical tweak, and it allowed Sporting to take charge. Despite not having the ball, they were now in control of the game out of possession, and the transitioning threat was always there. Manchester City were poor from a defensive point of view, and Sporting win 4-1. All in all, a pretty good night for Sporting, for Ruben Amorim, and maybe Manchester United fans as well. I think we enjoyed that one. But those are just my thoughts on the match. I want to hear yours in the comments down below. What did you think of the structure from Amorim in the first half, the second half? What was the big change? What was different about it? Which players impressed you? And can Amorim replicate some of this at Manchester United? Maybe not, but let me know what you think in the comments. Apart from that, we are finished for today. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you have enjoyed it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.